Welcome to Shakti Pulse, where we bring insights from industry titans for the benefit of startup founders. And today's guest is Penry Price, a Shakti Titan, and someone who's helped shape how billions of people experience advertising online and how thousands of companies grow their brands and revenue. So thank you for joining us today.
Great. Thank you, Liz. Good to be here.
And Penry, you've had such an expansive career. So maybe we can start there, from publishing to Google to leading LinkedIn's ad business through massive growth. Can you talk to us a little bit about your journey? And ever since you've left LinkedIn, what are you focused on now?
Well, the one constant, I think, Liz, was always that I'm very curious about, like, sort of not necessarily just what's next, but things that are interesting, things I might not know a lot about, things that I sort of believe could be more interesting in time. And so currently, I'll just start there, which is I left LinkedIn in the middle of February. And so for the last, say, 3 months or so, I've been trying to meet people, talk to people. The topic, of course, is around AI. And I think we're all excited and interested in it, but I don't necessarily, or I can't say that I know exactly what's happening or what will happen. And so I'm trying just to learn more about what's real, what's beyond sort of the initial value that we can all see around productivity or efficiencies. Certainly that makes it's very obvious, but I'm trying to think about, like, what are the next layers of AI? How does it actually help companies grow, or how do they start new, invest in new opportunities or build new businesses around AI and with AI? So that's sort of current. But that notion of curiosity, I actually started in investment banking, which isn't even on my LinkedIn profile. It was so short. It was like 6 months. I was in one of those training programs and didn't really love it. And so I went into publishing. And I remember I'd been in publishing for a while, I was sort of climbing the prototypical sort of corporate ladder. And I remember meeting and hearing about Google and an opportunity to move. And so I'd been in this publishing, much more of an analog world. You're worried about distribution and the cost of paper and postage and trucking and all these things. And then it was like this, sort of online world. And I sort of just figured, look, if I do, and this was early days Google, and I said, if I do this for a few years, I bet I'm going to learn a lot more and be much more sort of marketable as a professional versus staying here and just continuing to follow my sort of existing career. So that was always the sort of step for me, was trying to go to learn something to better position myself for whatever the next one or two things would be.
Great. And you've seen businesses across all stages. And now you are spending much of your time giving back and mentoring the next generation of early stage founders. What is it that excites you about that? And we're grateful because you're a Shakti Titan. So tell us a little bit about what you like about mentoring the next generation.
I thought when I was sort of in school, I thought I was going to be a teacher and coach. That was sort of what I thought I'd be in life. I had so many, and I turned 50 a couple of years ago, and for my 50th birthday, I wrote letters to all the people in my past that had influenced me, just to make sure that they knew that. And I was struck by how many coaches I wrote to, actually, from sports and high school or college or even Little League baseball. I found my Little League coach and wrote him a letter. And so that was like my idea of what I thought would be a really fruitful life about, giving or helping others. And so it didn't go that way. I didn't become a teacher and coach. I became, sort of involved in, sort of advertising and sort of the like. And what I sort of recognized as I sort of continued to sort of mature my career was how I gravitated towards working with younger in-career people to advise, to mentor, to coach. And when I left LinkedIn, I probably had 100 mentees.
Wow.
And they were all different shapes and sizes. One was once a year I would check in, and that was sort of the right sort of cadence. The others that were weekly. And whatever it was, I always had capacity and time to sort of give a little bit of feedback or answer a question. And so it's just, for me, a natural continuation of what I've done to sort of work with Shakti and work with founders and sort of think about where can I, there's going to be tons of things I won't be able to help with, but there'll be hopefully a few things. And if those few things can be helpful, that's great. Amazing.
That's great. Well, that's the first tidbit of advice for our founders: to write letters to the coaches and mentors who have supported them in the journey along the way. So I think people do really appreciate it and they'd like to see what people are up to now.
By the way, I got a letter back. I was saying that Little League coach, I got a letter back from his wife, who was like 86 years old. And she wrote this little, it was a paragraph at the most, and saying how much it meant to him that he wouldn't write me because it was sort of an old school kind of guy, but she wrote me back about how much it meant to him. So and it wasn't for that reason, but I felt like I had to really thank people that had helped me along the way.
Yeah, no, that's such a good practice. And so you've seen the full spectrum, 0 to 100 and beyond. At Shakti, we focus on very, very early. So we're the kindergarten teachers of venture, and we do the 0 to 1. And if you think about each of those stages, 0 to 1 is kindergarten, 1 to 100 can be middle school, and 100 and beyond high school. At each one of those stages, is there something what should CEOs be focusing on in each of those legs of growth? And especially from your seat as a revenue leader, what works at each stage?
Yeah, and between when I left Google, I went to it was like a 2-year gap between. I just needed a break, and for 2 years I worked at a startup. We had some revenue. Maybe it was at a Series B kind of stage. So we had some product. We had some there was some market receptivity, product market fit for us. But we were very early in terms of scaling sort of business. So a little bit of sense of that. But as you said, that's like whatever second or third grade in your analogy. What I will say is, and what I still think about, even at a large scale organization, you have to sort of focus on your core, like what you are good at, what you are meant to be. And I would think in kindergarten, same thing, you're learning to walk, to continue the analogy. You just have to make sure you're not trying to do too many things. Just stay maniacally focused on that first product or that first customer or those first 3 customers. If you're starting to think about commercialization, what is it that's going to be unique for them in relation to working with you? What is the value that you are going to create for, again, those customers that they aren't getting somewhere else, that they can then start to engage with you and even give you feedback, so that focus you have can start to grow and expand a little bit by a little bit. But, I've seen it. It's just focus. And we had early days, sort of think about, how do you feed the winners and starve the losers was another one. And Keval and I used to talk about this back when we worked together. That if you see something as an early stage company that's starting to actually have some traction, and there's other things that you may even like as the founder or CEO, but is not seeing the same kind of traction over a little bit of time. And even if you try to tweak it a little bit, it's still not really. Focus on the one that's winning, like really double down on things that are starting to gain traction, and run it. Make sure you're giving all the energy, as much energy as possible, to those things that are starting to, sort of have some promise in them or some really positive feedback, whatever that might be in terms of signal.
Great. And then one of the key things at the early stage, but really at any stage, is hiring and team. And I know that's an area that you're very passionate about, team and culture. And even from hearing you talk about mentoring 100 people at LinkedIn, that's incredible. What are some of the frameworks that you've seen in your own experience for building great teams? And does it change whether it's the day one team to when you have 20 people or 100 and beyond?
I think it changes. I think you have people that, and there's like so many different, sort of characteristics of a person when you're hiring them that might be strong for an early stage. Again, that 1, 2, 3, 4, kind of 5 people, to somebody who's a little bit more specialized when you're getting into 100 or 500, whatever kind of scale you're working towards. But so I do think it changes the sort of needs you have. Now, there's certainly going to be utility sort of characteristics that you want to have through anybody, no matter what stage. But I do think there's something about, recognizing that there are certain people that will be with you for the long time or the whole time, and then there'll be people that will be good for you and with you in phases. It is I mean, I think this is talked about, but it is the most important, most critical thing, I think, as somebody starts to think about a company and going beyond themselves or their co-founders, or who do you bring on and what value will they sort of provide to you. And I think for me, part of that is actually before you start hiring. If I was an early stage founder, I would start to talk to my, sort of venture capital team. I would start to talk to people about an outside view on what we need. Because sometimes I think we as, again, early stage people or founders that I've talked to, they're not even necessarily sure of what those first few hires should be. What function should they be in? Do we need a revenue generation person? Do we need additional engineering strength? Do we need some other marketing person to start to get our name out? I think they're not even sure actually, and maybe they shouldn't be, right? This is something that sort of takes time and understanding, and somebody who's been experienced enough to go through a number of these kind of seeing a company mature. But I would say first, before I start hiring, I would start to talk to my surrounding sort of influencers, my investors, partners, my own personal board of directors that I go to for conversations and advice about this before. So that would be stage one. Stage two then is just who is going to be, once you understand what function you're going to sort of need help from and start to hire in, what are the complementary skills certainly that you bring and this other person will bring to you. You're looking for that kind of, in those early stages, pretty much everyone is going to be working on everything. So what else does that person bring to you in terms of just capacity, understanding, experience, and pure skill that will actually complement the team at that stage to, again, help you get to the next stage? Because I think in those days, you're just trying to get from stage to stage. You're not necessarily thinking about end result. You're thinking about, okay, I'm here and I have one customer, or I don't even have a customer yet. How do I get to the next stage, which is I want 5 customers, or I want a product market fit that works enough that gives us confidence that we can actually start to, sort of rebuild and go back into, production mode to actually come out with a little bit more of a scaled product. So to me, that's the way I would think about it. But it is, as everyone talks about, I think it is very important, if not crucial, for founders to spend time with the idea of hiring, with the type of culture they want to build. I've always thought about and done, put down the principles of this, write down the company principles, the values, really make sure you can speak to those and believe in them as a founder or founder team, to really believe in those. And then that, to me, is really a helpful way to break the tie, if you will. And if there's some gray areas, if you go back to the principles to help you make a decision that's sometimes difficult, it really informs you of like, okay, that's what we stood, how does this person stack up against those principles? How do they deliver on what we said is one of the critical things about the company we're building? Does that person fit into sort of that kind of way of working? And if we choose a person from, like, is this the person? Because we're going to look at our principles and come out on the other side with a person. Does this person fit for that?
Yeah. And you mentioned culture, which it's very challenging for a company, large or small. Are there kind of examples that come to mind, maybe with some of the companies you've worked in or the startups you've mentored, that have really nailed how to form a good culture, especially as you're early on and you're bringing in a whole host of new people?
I've lived through a couple of, as I said, startup, we had maybe 80 people when I got there. I left, maybe there was 110 or 20. And then certainly at Google, small number to large, and same with LinkedIn. But I think you have to, the founders / executives have to care. Like, I really believe it's a top-down thing. To establish it, for it to become ingrained in a sort of a company, I think the culture has to be run and set up and believed and sort of authentically driven by the founders, by the team. Over time, what I've seen happen is then the employees are much more of the culture sort of warriors to keep the culture the way it is. And so I don't know when that starts to switch, but it does. And I would say now at these larger stage companies, it's the teams themselves. It's less about the executives, but the teams that buy into it and sort of police it themselves with their own hiring or the way they promote their teams or the way they write reviews or the way they think of these things. I think it's driven by the team. But in the early days and early until, again, I don't know, there's not like a magic number, but years have to be led by the founders. To me, in these longer scale sort of companies, it has to be years before it turns to the employees lead the culture.
One thing you said earlier was the first thing a founder should think about is going to their board of directors or the people that they talk to regularly for advice. So let's pretend if I am one of our founders who's in the B2B space selling to enterprises, talked a little bit about hiring. And one of the key things that always comes up is, when do you hire that VP of sales? What would your advice be?
In a B2B environment, I do think it's very critical to start to get customer feedback in B2B, meaning you've got to understand quickly if the solution you have, the product you have, whatever it is, fits into the way that these businesses work. Now, there's a product that's brand new, sort of two things. You could build a brand new product that they haven't used or is completely new to their sort of B2B acquisition, sort of process, either finding new customers or making more money. Or you're building a product that's within their stack that they already have, but you've built a better product. And to me, that both of those scenarios require you to have a very sort of heavy commercial understanding about where your solution is going to fit or how hard it is going to be to extract the existing solution that is going to be replaced by yours. So to me, in B2B in particular, I think you would go, at least my advice would be to go a little bit faster on the commercial side, to start to get ingrained in sort of the customer understanding of, how they make decisions, there's a B2B buying committee that's typically much larger than on the consumer side, where you and I can make a choice generally fairly quickly on the consumer side about if we're going to buy something or not. That doesn't really happen on the B2B side, especially when you're talking about software or large scale deployments of some kind of technology. You have a committee of people. And so the more you understand that, the more you start to build and talk to 1, 2, 5 customers. That means maybe hiring somebody. If it's VP level, it's a question, again, what kind of level you're talking about, but you need somebody who's going to be commercially minded, who's going to be actively sort of navigating the customer or the market that you're going to be trying to work with, I think, from an earlier sort of stage than on the consumer side.
And there's some people who think that the founder should be doing the sales, at least until a certain point.
Yep.
But if there is someone who's B2B expert and they have the relationships, maybe that could be beneficial.
I think it can be very beneficial, especially, again, what we were saying earlier, the notion of these early stages is still about focus. And so if the founder is, again, if they're at a stage where they do have a product and there is a need to sort of start to get it out in the market, then the founder should be one of the best, if not the best person to have those conversations. But if they also are still building the product or working with the product team or the engineering team to, make sure this is working well and spending time on the technical side, having somebody who is trusted, who knows the market, who is sort of coming in at the right time with those right characteristics to fit in with the principles of the company and has the experience, it makes sense to me to sort of start to move that more quickly.
Yeah. And you've seen kind of on both sides, this early stage startup side, as well as working at large companies in terms of startups trying to sell into B2B enterprises. Mm-hmm. If I were a founder starting out trying to sell into these B2B companies, what would your advice be for me? Maybe that's not the world that I come from, so I don't know how it works.
Well, it's hard because I think B2B to me can be more rewarding, but I think it can be very difficult in the early phases. I think you have, again, existing tech, you've got existing relationships, you've got typically these larger scale deployments where a bunch of people have to use this one tool or product. And so convincing somebody to sort of rip it out or a bunch of change management is a little difficult. So with that said, this founder, whoever it might be, has an idea that actually could work better for this company. And so to me, the confidence and the knowledge about that company, the way they work, the way the way they go to market, is really critical. So to go in and find a champion, which is really what comes down to, who is going to be the champion, the one person that's going to shepherd your idea internally at that company. And I will say on the B2B side, there's not one person either. Again, because of this buying committee, it's not just procurement, it's not just the CFO, it's not just the chief technology officer. There could be a mixture of this, and you have to recognize that it's going to take a little bit longer to navigate and figure out who this champion is going to be on the B2B side. But it's worth it, because once you get that person, it's much harder for somebody to change you out. Once you get in there, and again, I think that's the beauty of some of these sort of products on the B2B side is, the switching cost gets much higher. And so you can get in there again, start to add value, start to prove you're adding value. And I think it can scale quickly. Once you start, you can deploy, again, more seats or more licenses or more usage, whatever the model is that you have, I think in a much more scaled, much more quick way once you're in there.
Staying as the founder of the B2B company, if I'm hiring my first go-to-market person, you talked about some of the things to look for in terms of someone who has experience and they know the industry. What are some of the kind of pitfalls that you've seen in terms of go-to-market?
Yeah, I would almost put myself in this. When I went to be president of this little company, I hadn't had a lot of this experience. And so I was it took me a longer time to get up to speed, because I was sort of a little bit frozen with some of the running the company kind of things. And so just the day-to-day, sort of management of allocating resource, understanding time, like those things are really hard for the founders to sort of take on. And so for me, the pitfall is when you're bringing somebody in, if they're coming in very senior, are they willing to roll up the sleeves and like do the sales calls? Are they really going to go out pounding the pavement multiple times a day? If they've done this for years, or if they know all these people, there might be a little bit of a challenge there. You should have this kind of conversation. You should set up some KPIs around the actions and the objectives that you want that person to come in when they're, again, more senior. More junior, again, you might get a person who's willing to hustle, but are they going to actually get you access to decision makers? And again, with a B2B and a B2B sort of company, the decision maker may not be the most senior person. So sometimes, a junior person or more junior person who's willing and able to hustle and really knows the product, knows what's happening, that might be totally fine, because they actually can find a champion at a user level versus a sort of maybe final decision-making level, and they can influence the others on the buyer committee. So, there's a couple ways to think about this, but the pitfall is again, not going back to the principles, having somebody that doesn't really align with the principles, not being clear. I think, again, from a founder perspective, you have to be very clear on what you want this person to do. You've got to have a box around this person and say, this is exactly what I need you to do. I know we're early stage and there's a bunch of things could be interesting to you and you might be attracted to this conversation or that conversation, but keep them in the box. Your job is to do this and only this for a little while until we get some traction. And then maybe the box expands or changes a little bit. But I think keeping them focused on their job is really key. And that was me. I ended up, I was running all the revenue stuff and marketing and business development. And I was really interested in the business development side. I thought that was like an area, getting some partnerships to scale faster versus single customer. And I had all these sort of thoughts. And I'm not sure if I was like perfect at that. Like I might have been mismatching my own interests with the needs at that moment in time with what the company had to do. But again, to me, it's around focus, as I said multiple times. It's around making sure you have that person when you're going through the hiring process with very clear goals and objectives, and even how you're going to sort of rate the person's success up front. So you can have, sort of a real understanding before the person arrives. Yeah,
that's great advice. And you have mentioned focus many times, and I think it's important because it's so easy to creep outside of the scope. If a customer has something else they want you to do, But you started you were in an industry that was based on evolution from the paper advertising to mobile to AI and everything. So how do you know? How do you know when it's time when you should stay focused, or if you're like, actually, that thing could be the future and we don't want to fall behind?
I guess, the future is really exciting, but you might not be good at it. And so if you're good at something, you've already got an idea and you've got a reason for establishing this company, you've got a product you're working on. I would like keep focusing there on that. Can you get traction? Can you get product market fit? Can you get a customer to pay for something? If you're in that stage and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, this other thing looks really interesting, or there's a lot of capital moving towards that thing, or there's a lot of users doing that thing, it doesn't mean you're going to be good at that if that's just happening around you. It just means that that's happening also. And so I would say continue on your path. If there's a way to carve out 10% of your time, or somebody on the founding team or one of the new employees to sort of start to bring that intelligence in, or how do you talk to some outsiders? Again, I'm a huge believer in the courageousness of conversations with outsiders. A lot of people think you can go with these things alone or with just the founding team or something. I think the opposite is true. And so I think people that I've seen be successful are people that are courageous enough to go ask for advice, to go ask for help, to go ask for insights, to go ask for experiences. And so if something is happening external that you're starting to get attracted to, go talk to people in it. How do you learn more about it? Is there a natural way to pivot towards that that fits with already what you're doing? Or do you have to make a more radical change at some point? And that's a discussion you as the founder and maybe the investors would have. But my initial reaction to the question would be like, don't get too swayed and distracted by the new thing, because you just might not be good at it. And you're already doing this thing for a reason that you found that has a opportunity, that there's a market for, go for that, be good at that, and then try to learn about how you could possibly, again, without wasting too much time with keeping your focus, possibly add in or help or move towards some of these things that might be interesting also.
Yeah, I like the 10% suggestion that you gave. Switching gears a little bit, you mentioned that in your post LinkedIn career right now, you're interested in AI and just learning about all the things that it could do. So how do you think AI is reshaping advertising, from the creative part to the targeting and distribution, all the way to measurement?
I mean, the potential, at least for what I see so far, and as I say, if you go back to your analogy, I'm probably in my own second or third grade of learning, right? It's still sort of happening real time for all of us, but it feels like everything is going to get disrupted. Everything will change. I think you look at creative development. We've seen, the last Google's VO3. I think it's unbelievable. It's getting really, really close to not being able to tell what is AI from a video standpoint to traditional video. You look at sort of these large language models where you can actually start to see some reasoning, where you start to put in, well, this is what the brand stands for. This is what the brief is for what we're trying to accomplish as a marketer or as a brand. And what can come back from those models is unbelievable in terms of, how accurate and how helpful it is to sort of position what you're trying to do as a brand, or what you should be thinking about, who your audiences may be, what type of tone you should take, how do you differentiate yourself? All of that is already possible with these LLMs and connecting to those. And the question, which you and I were talking a little bit earlier, is what is the proprietary data set? Are you building something in this that you have some sense of ownership over, or you can actually have a defensible position against others that might have access to these sort of large language models? But I think measurement can be entirely, all of it, literally the entire supply chain of advertising, to me, feels like it's going in the next few years to look entirely different than what it is today.
Wow. And so what should founders actually be paying attention to? There's a lot of AI noise out there, but
Yeah.
for some of the early stage founders that you're mentoring, what are you telling them about looking at AI?
Well, this isn't going to be like anything, but like I hope they're all using it and practicing with these tools, which again, I think many are. I would find some time to, even with Google and Meta, LinkedIn, like these guys are all building AI tools from an advertising side. So use these tools, like start to play with them. If you're it doesn't cost much money. You could do things even organically where you're sort of posting this way using some AI tools. I would start to be doing that to start to figure out, okay, well, is it how different it is? Is it from our current way of thinking about our brand? Are we learning anything about our brand from, sort of deploying some of these tools or using some of these tools to sort of work and sort of position our brand? So I would absolutely, which again, I think everybody's been learning and hearing about is use these tools. I think, again, some of the big guys I mentioned all have these tools already embedded into some of their campaign managers and their UI. Play with those, use those. But I think that's like the early, it's still, again, sort of kindergarten, first grade. It's coming quickly. And what I think will happen is I think you will have a very different way of sort of the CAC, the customer acquisition cost is going to change. I think the way we use tools, the way we think about measurement will change. The way we think about how we use ad agencies will change dramatically. And so being in tune with this is going to be important as sort of founders and others are starting to think about building brand, because especially in B2B, the brand itself is actually very important, because I think that the data says that about, 88% of the purchases in B2B are either the first or second brand that those B2B committees already knew about. So they don't buy new brands in B2B. They buy brands they already have some kind of knowledge and relationship with. And so somehow as an early stage and again, you've got to start to recognize I've got to build my brand. Doesn't mean spend money. It means publish content, thought leadership, whatever it is, to make sure that those sort of audiences or companies or again, buyer committees start to understand who you are.
We were talking a little bit earlier about favorite ad campaigns from the past. So we don't need to rehash them, but I have my ones to look into. So how does creativity play into it? In a world of automation for marketing, there still needs to be a human in there somewhere, unless AI is coming up with all of the creativity. Yeah. What's the balance?
I think, and I've been talking a little bit about this with one of the founders actually that we're working with, and what we've seen is that the AI does an amazing job of sort of taking an idea and sort of building out from the center of that idea. But AI, at least to me, and I've been trying to do a bunch of different prompts for it and trying to play with this brand, it hasn't created yet like a net new idea for us. And so there is still creativity, which is first off in the initial thinking of what kind of brand do we want to be, what kind of company, and maybe there's a way to match your principles. We've talked about your values, your principles, sort of what you stand for. Then there's like the tone and how you want to approach communication in general. And you can start to, create some kind of view of what your brand sort of looks like and feels like, which is an exercise I think all these companies, everyone goes through. So I don't see AI creating these things yet. I do see creative and people still having to be in that conversation about who are we going to be, what should we look like, what should we stand for, what do we want to be proud of when our family or our friends or our customers sees what we are. And I think that's at least, I struggle to see that not being the case for some period of time, that we are still going to need creatives to manage this. Again, they might not do a lot of the outputs, right? The videos or the treatments, et cetera, but they'll be doing the inputs, I think, for some time when we're talking about how do we want to shape what a brand stands for, looks like, and plays like.
So just wanted to wrap up with a question on one big theme these days is future of work. And you've spent, from your time at LinkedIn, you've had a front row seat to how work is being transformed. Are there any themes that you're excited about when it comes to future of work, and even how you're advising founders now on how skills and talent will look for the next 5 to 10 years?
This really is, and you guys especially on the venture side understand, like chaos and change brings real opportunity. And I think that's true in this case. The hard part is there's going to be a lot of people in the middle of this change, either losing roles, losing jobs, or jobs going away, or jobs being created also, and that we may or may not have the skills to get some of those jobs. There's a couple ways I look at this. One is, jobs, at the end of the day, jobs are a series of tasks. And I think that jobs not necessarily like those aren't, but tasks are going away. And so if I were in a job that, if I looked at, like, wrote down, what do I do every day? And if I could actually be honest with myself and which of those tasks are repeatable and things that possibly or definitely AI would do as well, if not better than I'd be, that's a first filter I would go through. How much of my job, my tasks are repeatable and an AI could do, an agent or whatever. And so that's like the first thing is look at tasks. Like, it's not about jobs, it's about tasks in jobs. The second thing is, I do think that, the disruption is real. I think that's obvious. We're already starting to see that in the hiring numbers today. But we haven't yet started to see the benefit of this, which means, like, what are the new jobs created or that will be created? And there will be plenty. This happens every time there's a real disruption, is there's a new whole cycle of, even if you just look back to Google, there was no such thing as search engine optimization or search engine marketing. And now there's hundreds of thousands of people in that industry. So it's real. I would think about tasks. I would think about, how do I use AI, learn to use it so I can complement my own skills. The last piece I will say is, what feels like is happening is we are going, if you're a doer versus thinker is what I think about a lot. And if I'm just doing things, that's going to be a little bit of where the problem area exists. But if I'm spending time thinking about things and possibly creating things, that's the safer area. And so, again, in my own role or in a role of a founder or anybody, or hiring somebody on the team, doing versus thinking. And if this person's time is going to be spent thinking about how to help the company and then building things or creating things, that's different than if it's somebody who's coming to do something for us, or there's a bunch of tasks they will be charged with doing. That feels like a question mark for me about the validity of the need for that kind of role.
I really like how you separate between the thinkers, thinking and doing.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, Penry, thank you.
Thank you, Liz.
We covered a lot: go to market, people, culture, hiring, future of work, and AI, of course. So thank you for your support and being a Shakti Titan and mentoring the next generation of founders. And thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Liz. Appreciate it.
Great.